January 1941. Europe trembled under the relentless thunder of the Blitzkrieg. Tanks tore across Poland, France, and the Low Countries with a precision and speed that stunned the world. In dimly lit German war rooms, officers leaned over vast maps, tracing the paths of armored divisions and panzer formations as if playing a grand game of chess. Their eyes sparkled with confidence, their minds calculating every move with meticulous care. To them, victory was a matter of courage, tactics, and the disciplined execution of strategy. Speed was their weapon, surprise their ally, and morale their invisible force multiplier. Logistics, they believed, were a detail best left to quartermasters and clerks, a secondary concern compared to the thrill of decisive battle. Across the continent, soldiers charged forward, trucks rattling over cobblestone streets, tanks crushing obstacles and infantry pressing relentlessly. German commanders marveled at the efficiency of their own army, convinced that no force on earth could match the Blitzkrieg's rhythm. Reports of captured territories and surrendered armies only reinforced their sense of invincibility. Each success fed their hubris. They saw themselves as masters of war, a machine powered not by supply lines or distant factories, but by discipline, strategy, and the sheer spirit of their soldiers. Even the most experienced officers overlooked the quiet complexity of modern warfare. Maps marked only front lines and objectives, but behind the scenery of conquest lay the hidden arteries that made it possible. The trucks that ferried fuel, the trains that carried ammunition, and the ports that funneled resources from distant nations. These were invisible lines to German eyes, unglamorous and uncelebrated. They assumed that the enemy, any enemy, was just another army to be outmaneuvered, outgunned, and outthought. The concept that an army's strength could be sustained, or crushed before it even reached the battlefield, was foreign, almost unimaginable. The German myth of supremacy became a lens through which every encounter was judged. When French defenses crumbled in weeks, the officers concluded that planning, innovation, and sheer audacity determined outcomes, not the industrial engines humming quietly in the background. When the British Expeditionary Force evacuated at Dunkirk, German command believed it a minor setback, a tactical hiccup. They could not yet see the larger war forming, a conflict that would not merely be decided in forests, streets, or bunkers, but in the endless infrastructure that connected production to front lines. Even within the German ranks, there were whispers of caution. A few officers recognized that sustaining momentum required more than men and machines. It required constant resupply, fuel, food, and spare parts. But these cautions were drowned out by the chorus of victory. Blitzkrieg had blinded them to the silent truths of logistics. The myth of German superiority became both a lens and a prison, shaping strategies that assumed speed and tactics alone could carry the day. They underestimated not only their enemies, but the invisible forces that truly defined endurance in modern war. As 1941 unfolded, the map of Europe seemed to bend beneath German might. And yet the seeds of their eventual reckoning were already planted. For every rapid advance, every conquered city, the Germans left behind not only exhausted soldiers, but also the gnawing truth. A war of machines and men could not endure without the ceaseless flow of resources. Battles were not won in the quiet confidence of a command post or the courage of elite troops alone. Victory required an understanding that the real fight often happened far from the smoke and gunfire, in the steel veins of industry and the endless rhythm of ships and trains. And so, as German officers reveled in their supremacy, they could not yet imagine that the war was quietly shifting beyond their control. Speed and tactics could win battles, but the ultimate victory, the war itself, would hinge on the invisible networks that no map could capture, no strategy could predict, and no courage alone could overcome. In the years ahead, they would discover that battles aren't decided just at the front, but in the endless trains and ships behind it. Spring 1941, Eastern Europe. German tanks thundered across the plains of Poland and into the forests of France, their tracks carving paths through mud and snow alike. To the casual observer, the Wehrmacht seemed unstoppable, a flawless instrument of war, moving at lightning speed. Yet behind this veneer of invincibility lay a fragile backbone, a logistical system stretched thin and teetering on the edge of collapse. What officers called efficiency was in truth a precarious patchwork of old rails, horse-drawn wagons, and scarce fuel reserves. Victory, it seemed, had masked the very weaknesses that would one day unravel the Reich. The German army relied almost entirely on railroads. Tracks dictated the speed of advance, the placement of troops, and the delivery of ammunition. A single destroyed bridge, a blocked line, or a misrouted train could halt a division in its tracks. Rail was precise, but inflexible. Tank columns, motorized infantry, and heavy artillery all depended on it, yet the network could not bend to sudden needs. When the Blitzkrieg pushed deeper into enemy territory, supply lines lengthened dangerously, stretching the Reich's fragile logistical web to its breaking point. Trucks, a modern military's lifeblood, were in painfully short supply. Thousands of mechanized vehicles were promised but never delivered, and those that existed were cannibalized constantly for parts. Fuel shortages compounded the problem. Despite occupying resource-rich lands, Germany could not produce enough oil to keep its motorized units moving indefinitely. When trucks failed, horse-drawn wagons became the fallback, a grueling and slow alternative. Millions of horses were pressed into service, their sweat and exhaustion sustaining advances that would falter without them. The image of sleek panzers racing across Europe hid a reality of grinding exhaustion. Infantry trudging behind, wagons creaking over cobblestones, and officers calculating how far their limited resources could carry them before grinding to a halt. Even ammunition, the currency of war, revealed the cracks in the system. Factories worked tirelessly, but production often failed to meet the voracious demands of multiple fronts. Rationing became necessary, and commanders were forced to prioritize which units received what supplies. It was a delicate dance, and one misstep could turn victory into disaster. Meanwhile, intelligence reports indicated that enemy forces were observing these weaknesses, though the Germans remained confident that their superior training and tactics would compensate. Yet beneath every triumph lay a gnawing vulnerability. Each rapid conquest left stretched supply lines, exhausted horses, and depleted fuel depots behind. The victories were intoxicating, but they gave the illusion of endless capability. German officers reveled in their triumphs, unaware that the very infrastructure sustaining their Blitzkrieg, rails, wagons, oil, and rationed ammunition, was insufficient to maintain momentum indefinitely. The system was brittle, and luck alone had carried them through their early campaigns. One miscalculation, one prolonged engagement, and the consequences could be catastrophic, as German engineers scrambled to patch broken rails and officers haggled over limited fuel. The world beyond Europe was quietly shifting. Across the Atlantic, a different kind of war machine was awakening, one not reliant on fragile lines, horses, or limited oil. One that measured power not just in men and tactics, but in relentless production, endless transport, and a vision for sustaining conflict on a scale the Reich could scarcely imagine. And so, while the Germans celebrated another victory, they remained blind to a looming reality. Their empire's backbone was delicate, stretched, and vulnerable. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, America was preparing something entirely different. December 1941, American shores. The shock of Pearl Harbor still hung heavy in the air, a reminder that the world's conflict had reached the Western Hemisphere. Across the United States, a nation once divided by isolationist tendencies now shifted with a singular purpose: to transform its economy, its industry, and its society into a machine capable of waging total war. Unlike Europe, where armies had moved at the speed of horses, rails, and human endurance, America would fight on a scale no one had ever imagined. Its battlefield would stretch from factories to oceans, from rail yards to highways, and in every corner, The message was clear: production was the weapon, and speed would be its trigger. From Michigan's auto plants to the steel mills of Pennsylvania, factories hummed with unprecedented intensity. Workers, men and women, young and old, rushed to meet quotas that had once seemed impossible. Automobiles gave way to tanks. Tooling for radios became tooling for artillery. The Liberty Ship program alone exemplified the nation's newfound resolve. Vessels that once took months to build were now assembled in weeks, sometimes days, by a workforce synchronized as precisely as any military operation. Convoys of these ships would soon carry food, fuel, vehicles and weapons across thousands of miles of dangerous seas, protected from submarines by sheer numbers and unrelenting strategy. The United States did not stop at factories. It reimagined the entire transportation network. Railroads were upgraded, ports expanded, and highways cleared for fleets of trucks capable of delivering supplies faster than any army in history had ever imagined. Every tank, every artillery piece, every ton of ammunition was paired with a method to move it instantly where it was needed most. Depots sprang up across the country, stocked with the redundancy of foresight, spare engines, replacement tires, and fuel to sustain armies that had yet to leave American soil. It was not merely preparation. It was orchestration at a scale that German generals could scarcely fathom. The psychological impact was immediate. Officers on both sides of the Atlantic quickly realized that America did not see war as a series of isolated battles, but as a continuous operation, with every factory and every transport link feeding the front lines like a living organism. The enemy could strike at any point, but the American system adapted. When a shipment was lost or a convoy delayed, another was already en route. This was not luck. This was planning, precision, and the kind of discipline that could sustain conflict over years without faltering. By mid-1942, the U.S. had produced more trucks than Germany had in its entire army, more tanks than could be deployed on a single front, and enough aircraft to dominate the skies. Convoys sailed across the Atlantic, braving storms and submarines, each vessel a rolling testament to industrial and logistical supremacy. German intelligence began to note the scale, but they struggled to comprehend its implications. Every advance they made in Europe, every hard-won victory, was matched by an invisible army of machines, fueled and ready, moving faster than any human calculation could track. The German officers had once believed that war was determined by courage, strategy, and elite troops. Now across the ocean, a new reality emerged. The war would be decided by production lines, transport networks, and the relentless capacity to sustain an army far beyond the front. The battlefield extended beyond Europe, beyond forests and trenches, into ports, rail yards, and assembly plants humming day and night. And the Americans, it became clear, were just getting started. German officers would soon see that America's true power wasn't just in tanks, but in how fast it could move them. Spring 1942. Across American factories, the rhythm of industry was relentless. The roar of presses, the hiss of steam, and the pounding of metal echoed like artillery in a distant battlefield. From these factories emerged a new kind of soldier, one without a uniform, without a rifle, but every bit as vital to victory, the American truck. The GMC 6X6, the Dodge, the Studebaker, names that would become legends in their own right, rolled off assembly lines in staggering numbers. Millions of them. Each vehicle a lifeline, each engine a promise that no soldier would advance without fuel, no cannon would fire without ammunition, no victory would be left unclaimed for lack of mobility. On the battlefields of Europe and North Africa, these trucks became the arteries of war. They carried fuel for tanks, rations for infantry, medical supplies for the wounded, and ammunition for the relentless artillery barrages that defined modern conflict. Unlike Germany, where soldiers relied heavily on horses and horse-drawn wagons to haul artillery and food, the Americans had mechanized mobility on a scale never seen before. The German army, sleek and efficient though it appeared, depended on a fragile combination of railroads and manpower. A single rainstorm could bog down their wagons. A destroyed rail line could immobilize an entire division. In contrast, American trucks designed for endurance, adaptability, and sheer force could traverse mud, snow, and sand with unyielding persistence. The psychological impact on the battlefield was profound. German commanders, watching these convoys pour into ports, saw endless lines of vehicles moving with clockwork precision. At first, they could not believe what they were seeing. How could a nation so far from the front lines sustain armies with such speed and reliability? Reports trickled in of entire divisions being supplied faster than Germany could maneuver reinforcements, of artillery and tanks appearing on front lines as if by magic, each supported by the invisible veins of American industry. For an army used to horses and rationed fuel, the scale of mechanization was staggering, almost surreal, and the innovation went beyond mere numbers. American trucks were standardized for repair, interchangeable parts, and rapid maintenance. A wheel broken in the desert could be replaced with one shipped across the Atlantic. Engines could be swapped in hours. Each vehicle was designed not just to transport but to endure, to be repaired and returned to service, and to multiply its effect across the war effort. This was mobility transformed into a strategic weapon, a force multiplier whose influence extended far beyond the driver's seat. By late 1942, the river of trucks was unstoppable. Convoys snaked across continents, from the factories of Detroit to the ports of New York, from the beaches of North Africa to the frozen forests of Russia. They carried more than supplies, they carried strategy. Routes were chosen not just for terrain, but for speed, for redundancy, and for the ability to outpace enemy anticipation. American generals realized that the war could be fought not only by force of arms, but by the ability to move, supply, and adapt faster than any opponent. A division with fuel and ammunition could fight continuously. A division without was a corpse waiting to happen. The Germans would come to understand this lesson, but not yet. For now, the endless parade of American trucks rolled on, invisible engines of dominance, shaping the flow of battles long before shots were fired. The roar of the engines became the pulse of a global war, a heartbeat that no strategy of lightning assault could silence. And these trucks didn't just drive supplies, they drove strategy. Summer 1942. The Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly, a liquid highway connecting the industrial heart of America to the embattled fronts of Europe and North Africa. Here the true scale of logistics revealed itself, not in maps, strategy, or brave maneuvers, but in something far more elemental: fuel. Gasoline, diesel, and lubricants flowed like lifeblood through the veins of the Allied war effort, ensuring that tanks, trucks, and aircraft could move, fight, and survive. While German generals debated tactics and maneuvers, American planners were asking a more fundamental question. How do you keep an army running when every mile, every operation depends on oil? The answer came in multiple forms. Oil tankers crossed the Atlantic in vast convoys, guarded by destroyers and aircraft, carrying millions of gallons of fuel. Each ship was a lifeline, each drop of fuel a potential battle won or lost. In the ports, pipelines and storage facilities handled this precious cargo, ensuring rapid transfer from ship to shore, then onward to trucks, tanks, and aircraft. Innovation didn't stop there. The Allies would soon develop Pluto, pipelines under the ocean, a network of flexible pipelines that funneled petroleum directly from England to the continent after D-Day. What had once required hundreds of trucks and ships could now move silently and continuously under the sea, invisible to enemy eyes. On land, mobility required portable solutions. Enter the humble jerry can, compact, durable, and endlessly practical. Soldiers carried fuel across deserts, forests, and frozen landscapes. Each can a promise that their tanks would keep moving, that artillery would not fall silent, that infantry could advance without fear of grinding to a halt. These cans were standardized, stackable, and interchangeable, allowing fuel to reach even the most isolated units in hours rather than days. For the first time, logistics became a tactical weapon as much as a support system. The contrast with Germany could not have been starker. While American supply lines flowed like a well-oiled river, the Reich's tanks often faced the cruel reality of empty fuel tanks. German commanders, once confident in the speed and mobility of their panzers, found themselves hampered by shortages. Horses were pressed into service to tow what vehicles could not, while fuel depots became contested targets, constantly under threat of bombing or mismanagement. A single miscalculation in supply could immobilize divisions, halting offensives and forcing retreats that were otherwise unnecessary. By late 1942, the difference was undeniable. American forces moved with a confidence born not just of training, courage, or strategy, but of an unbroken chain of fuel and supply. Tanks rumbled forward knowing that gas was waiting. Planes could patrol skies knowing fuel was available for sorties. And armies could fight continuously without fear of exhaustion brought on by logistical failure. For the Germans, each advance carried an unspoken anxiety. Would the tanks run dry? Would ammunition be delayed? Would their war machine grind to a halt, not because of enemy fire, but because of a failure in the very element that powered it? The lesson was clear, even to distant observers. The Reich's panzers could win battles, but without fuel, they couldn't win the war. Early 1943. The skies over Europe were no longer empty. They were filled with the thunder of engines, the roar of propellers, and the unmistakable shadow of American air power. From the factories of Ohio and Michigan to the airfields of England, the United States had orchestrated a level of aerial logistics that the world had never seen. Thousands of bombers, fighters, and transport planes were produced, fueled, and maintained daily, a relentless tide of machines that could overwhelm any front. For the Germans, accustomed to repairing what they had and stretching resources thin, the scale was staggering, and as they would soon learn, terrifying. Every plane that took off required a chain of support invisible to the enemy. Mechanics worked around the clock, inspecting engines, repairing fuselages, replacing instruments, and tuning every system to perfection. Fuel and munitions were delivered with the same precision that had characterized American trucks and Liberty ships. Runways were cleared, spare parts stockpiled, and crews rotated with surgical efficiency. What might have been a bottleneck in any other nation became an unstoppable flow in America. A bomber lost over enemy territory today could be replaced tomorrow, often with minimal delay, and a trained pilot would follow, ensuring that the momentum of air power never faltered. The Germans, by contrast, struggled to maintain what they had. Each Luftwaffe aircraft lost required time-consuming repairs or the redistribution of scarce resources. Fuel shortages, bombing raids, and industrial limitations meant that replacements were slow, inconsistent, and often inadequate. Even elite units, capable of remarkable feats of skill and courage, found themselves grounded by limitations that had nothing to do with enemy fire. For every bomber Germany could patch together, the Americans were already producing 2 more. Every sortie, flown by a depleted Luftwaffe, was met by a growing, well-supplied and relentless air armada. The psychological effect on German commanders was profound. They had long assumed that skill, tactics, and elite pilots could compensate for material shortages, that victories in the air were determined by courage and strategy alone. Now they watched as American forces not only replaced what was lost, but expanded the air war, striking deeper and more relentlessly with every passing month. Supply had become a weapon as formidable as any gun or plane, and its impact was visible in the skies above Germany itself. This dominance did not manifest instantly. Convoys of spare engines and munitions moved from factories to airfields with quiet precision. Pilots trained in stateside programs rotated into theaters of operations seamlessly, ready to replace casualties and maintain pressure. Every element of air logistics, from fuel to spare propellers, was orchestrated to sustain a tempo of combat that Germany could not hope to match. The US did not just build planes. It built the capacity to use them over and over in a cycle that made attrition a weapon directed entirely against the enemy. By mid-1943, the impact was undeniable. German officers, once confident in their ability to hold the skies, began to feel the invisible hand of American logistics constrict their options. Bombing raids intensified. Transport planes delivered men and supplies with precision, and the Luftwaffe found itself stretched to the breaking point. The war in the air was no longer just a contest of skill. It was a contest of production, of replacement, and of the ability to sustain a campaign beyond the limits of human imagination. And soon, the skies above Germany would be filled with proof of America's supply superiority. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy awoke to the roar of artillery, the crash of waves, and the disciplined chaos of tens of thousands of soldiers landing under fire. To those witnessing the storm from above or afar, it appeared to be a battle of courage and brute force, a test of determination against fortified defenses. Yet beneath every landing craft, every soldier, every tank pushing through the surf, lay a deeper story, one of meticulous planning, industrial might, and logistical mastery that would stun even the most seasoned German commanders. Months before the first troops hit the beach, American and Allied engineers had been quietly constructing the foundations of the invasion. In southern England, factories churned out prefabricated mulberry harbours, floating ports designed to be assembled on the coast of Normandy, enabling the rapid offloading of men, vehicles and supplies. Fuel pipelines were laid across the channel, carrying millions of gallons to keep armoured divisions moving and aircraft in the air. Depots were stockpiled with ammunition, food, medical supplies, and replacement vehicles, all positioned to support a full-scale invasion before a single shot was fired. This was not improvisation. It was orchestration on a scale the Germans could scarcely comprehend. When the invasion began, the result was immediate and overwhelming. Troops were fed, armed, and reinforced at a pace that German officers could not anticipate. Tanks and artillery arrived in synchronization with infantry waves, all supplied by an invisible network that stretched across the ocean and into every warehouse, rail line and highway leading to the front. The mulberry harbours, floating against the tide, allowed ships to unload with extraordinary speed, bypassing the need for traditional ports, which were heavily defended or destroyed. Fuel flowed through pipelines laid under the channel, a silent river feeding the hungry engines of war. Every operation was timed, every supply chain calculated to ensure that the front never stalled. German commanders watched in disbelief. They had assumed that coastal defenses, mines, and fortified bunkers would slow or even halt the invasion, yet the Allies seemed to anticipate every obstacle. Every beachhead secured, every bridge seized, every road cleared was a testament not just to bravery, but to planning, foresight, and the sheer scale of logistical superiority. German units, already stretched thin, could not respond quickly enough. Reinforcements arrived too late, ammunition ran low, and confusion spread as Allied supplies flooded the beaches. The myth of rapid German counterattack crumbled in the face of an enemy whose strength came not just from soldiers, but from an unbroken chain of supply and preparation. The scale of the operation was staggering. Millions of tons of equipment, vehicles, and provisions had crossed the Atlantic and been distributed with precision. Every soldier carried with him the confidence that his position, weapon, and sustenance were guaranteed not by luck, but by systems designed for endurance and adaptability. German officers, once confident in their tactical prowess, found themselves reacting to a war machine they could not hope to outpace. By the end of the first week, it was clear that D-Day was more than a landing. It was a demonstration of the industrial and logistical might of America and its allies. The Germans had expected courage and firepower to meet them, but they encountered coordination, planning, and the unyielding rhythm of supply. Every obstacle seemed anticipated, every delay accounted for, every division supplied before it even knew it needed support. And then came the single greatest supply challenge of the entire war. August 1944. Northern France. The fields and roads of Normandy bore the scars of the fiercest fighting the continent had seen. The Allies had broken out of their beachhead and were advancing faster than anyone had predicted. Tanks roared through liberated villages, infantry pressed forward, and artillery pounded German positions without pause. Yet with every mile gained, a new challenge emerged. The soldiers were outrunning their supply lines. Fuel, ammunition, and food were running thin. Without a solution, victory could stall, not from enemy fire, but from the sheer limits of distance and time. The answer came in the form of the Red Ball Express. Named after the red balls painted on signs to mark its routes, this massive convoy system would redefine what it meant to move an army. Thousands of trucks, driven by men working in shifts around the clock, carried the lifeblood of the Allied advance: gasoline for tanks, rounds for artillery, rations for soldiers, and spare parts for vehicles. Routes stretched from captured ports and depots in Normandy deep into the heart of France, traversing bombed-out bridges, muddy fields, and narrow roads jammed with traffic. It was a logistical ballet, choreographed with precision, yet executed under the relentless pressures of war. Drivers faced danger at every turn. German artillery and snipers still lurked. Roads were littered with wrecked vehicles, and the constant strain of long hours tested endurance to the limit. Yet the Red Ball Express kept moving. A river of trucks stretching hundreds of miles, flowing endlessly to keep the front supplied. Warehouses became nodes of orchestration, coordinating convoys, prioritizing loads, and tracking every gallon of fuel and every crate of ammunition. The system was as much about timing and organization as it was about sheer horsepower. German officers watched with a mixture of awe and horror. They had never seen anything like it. For an army accustomed to reliance on horses, limited trucks, and stretched rail lines, the scale was unimaginable. A single division could be resupplied in a matter of hours rather than days, maintaining the tempo of attack while keeping the enemy constantly off balance. No amount of tactical genius could replicate the speed, scale, or precision of this operation. The Germans had perfected Blitzkrieg, but they were now facing a force that could sustain Blitzkrieg indefinitely. The psychological impact on both sides was profound. Allied soldiers, confident that fuel and ammunition would always arrive, advanced with determination and speed, while German commanders grew increasingly desperate, forced to react to movements they could neither predict nor match. Each mile gained by the Allies was a testament not to luck, but to the unseen army of logistics officers, drivers, and planners whose work was invisible but decisive. The Red Ball Express was not merely a supply line, it was the artery through which victory flowed. By the fall of 1944, the Germans had begun to grasp the magnitude of what they were up against. Every tank rolling forward, every artillery barrage delivered, and every captured town supplied by these convoys was proof that America's strength extended far beyond courage or tactics. It was embedded in the organization, the production, and the relentless motion of its logistical machine. Winter 1944. The Rhine River froze under a harsh northern wind, and across the battered landscapes of Western Europe, the German army began to falter, not because of courage, strategy, or numbers, but because it had run out of the one thing every war depends on: supplies. Tanks ground to a halt in mud-choked fields, artillery pieces sat silent with empty shells, and soldiers scavenged for food where none remained. After years of rapid victories, the Reich's military machine was finally exposed as fragile, brittle, and incapable of sustaining itself against an opponent who had mastered the art of endless supply. For decades, German officers had believed that skill, discipline, and audacity could carry them through any battle. Blitzkrieg had reinforced that illusion, masking the cracks in their logistics with rapid, decisive advances. But now, in the final months of 1944, the reality became impossible to ignore. Fuel depots were depleted, rail lines were destroyed or sabotaged. Horse-drawn wagons could carry only a fraction of what mechanized armies demanded. Troops that had once stormed Europe with confidence now huddled in freezing trenches, unable to advance, unable to retreat, immobilized by the collapse of their own supply networks. In contrast, American forces operated with a different rhythm entirely. Across two oceans, convoys of Liberty ships carried fuel, vehicles and ammunition to ports in England and France. Trucks like the GMC 6X6 and Dodge traversed newly liberated roads, maintaining the tempo of the advance. Airfields bristled with planes, fueled, armed, and maintained daily. The Allies' supply networks were not an afterthought. They were the backbone of every operation, designed for endurance, redundancy, and adaptability. Where Germany ran dry, America flowed continuously, a tide of resources that could not be stopped by weather, sabotage, or enemy action. The collapse of German logistics had immediate and devastating effects. Panzer divisions, once symbols of invincibility, stalled in the mud, their engines silent. Infantry lacked ammunition, forcing retreats from positions they might have otherwise held. Commanders, once confident in their tactical brilliance, found themselves powerless against a war machine fueled not just by men and weapons, but by relentless organization and production. Every delay, every shortage, and every misstep compounded the chaos. The soldiers' morale plummeted as hunger, exhaustion, and fear replaced the illusion of invincibility. Meanwhile, American forces advanced with remarkable precision, sustained by the invisible armies of mechanics, drivers, engineers, and planners. Every tank that rolled forward, every shell that struck a target, every town captured, was backed by a chain of supply stretching thousands of miles, unbroken and unstoppable. The contrast could not have been clearer. One army crumbling from the lack of fuel, food, and ammunition, the other pressing forward with everything it needed, almost effortlessly. For the officers of the Reich, the final truth was undeniable. Their doctrine, built on speed, tactics, and elite units, could not compensate for a lack of the most basic necessities. The war was no longer a contest of courage or strategy alone. It was a contest of supply, endurance, and the capacity to sustain conflict indefinitely. And in that contest, America had already proven victorious. Spring 1945, Europe lay in ruins. Cities smoldered, rivers ran red with the echoes of battle, and armies, once feared and celebrated, crumbled under the weight of exhaustion and defeat. German officers, once confident in the invincibility of their tactics and the courage of their soldiers, now faced a truth they could no longer deny. In memoirs and post-war reflections, many admitted what had been obvious on the ground, yet invisible in their calculations. America had won not merely through bravery, strategy, or superior weapons, but through the quiet, unstoppable power of logistics, from factories humming day and night to assembly lines producing millions of vehicles, tanks, and aircraft. The United States had created an industrial engine of war unparalleled in history. Every Liberty ship launched, every truck assembled, every pipeline laid across the ocean was a deliberate strike in a war of production, movement, and foresight. While German armies had depended on the heroics of men and the brilliance of tactical planning, the Americans understood that endurance, preparation, and the invisible orchestration of resources determined the true outcome of modern conflict. Trains, trucks, and convoys moved with relentless precision, ensuring that no soldier lacked food, no tank lacked fuel, no artillery lacked ammunition. Airfields and maintenance depots were staffed around the clock, keeping planes ready to dominate the skies, replace losses, and support ground advances. Every mile of highway, every ship sailing across the Atlantic, every barrel of oil delivered to the front was part of a system designed to sustain combat indefinitely. The Americans did not fight a single battle. They waged a continuous, unyielding campaign of supply, and through it, every battle became theirs to win. German officers, reading reports and observing their crumbling forces, realized that their tactical brilliance could not overcome this invisible force. Panzer divisions without fuel, artillery without shells, infantry without food, no strategy could compensate for such shortages. What had seemed secondary in the planning rooms of Berlin, the organization of resources, the speed of transport, the foresight of supply, was in fact the decisive factor. Every heroic maneuver, every courageous charge, every defensive line stretched thin, could only delay the inevitable when facing an opponent whose war machine flowed like a river. Unbroken and unstoppable, the lesson extended beyond victory or defeat. It revealed the essence of modern warfare. In a conflict where weapons could be replaced faster than they were destroyed, where every soldier's need was anticipated, and where the tempo of battle was dictated not just by tactics, but by movement and supply, success belonged to the side that understood the invisible game. Factories, trucks, ships, pipelines, these were the true instruments of power, more decisive than any gun, more enduring than any frontline heroics. America had mastered the art of sustaining war, and through it had reshaped what it meant to fight and win. And yet the story is not merely one of machines and planning. It is a story of human ingenuity, resilience, and foresight. From the engineers designing assembly lines to the drivers racing across Europe under threat of attack. From the sailors guiding convoys across the Atlantic to the planners coordinating every shipment. The invisible army of logistics was powered by determination, intelligence, and vision. It was a testament to the belief that preparation, organization, and relentless action can outmatch even the fiercest battlefield. In the end, victory wasn't just forged in steel and fire, but in the relentless flow of supplies, the lifeblood of modern war. And through this lesson, America demonstrated a universal truth. Strength lies not only in courage or weapons, but in the quiet mastery of systems, the foresight to sustain, and the endurance to move forward when others falter. Logistics had not only supported the war, it had won it.